Freedom X only represents conservatives who are discriminated against on the basis of their viewpoint. Legal term of art you should memorize if you don't know it already, viewpoint discrimination, and that's what we sue under the First Amendment, that legal theory. Before I introduce Carol Swain, I just want to mention a little bit about Freedom X. In 2009, we represented American Freedom Alliance when they tried to stage a fundraising event at the California Science Center. It was intended to support intelligent design theory, and they were going to screen a movie called Darwin's Dilemma, which is an intelligent design documentary. It was to be followed with a panel discussion by some of the intelligent design experts from the Discovery Institute in Seattle. When the Smithsonian Institution heard that this event was being planned to be held at one of its affiliated science museums, it contacted the Science Center and said, cancel that contract. We don't need to tar the science world with this creationist viewpoint. Of course, if you know anything about intelligent design theory, it's not creationism. They canceled the event. I got a call from Avi Davis, who, God bless him, had become friends with me. And we sued the Science Center, and it became the first victory in support of intelligent design theory in American courts. So that's what we do. Right now we're currently representing a Texas high school teacher who was fired because he was tweeting off-duty anti-Islam, pro-Christian sentiments. An activist here in Southern California who tried to he's a videographer, and he tried to videotape a public hearing, an open public hearing under the California Public Open Meeting Act. Gary Gelina. And so those are the kinds of cases we take on. Now, when I was first put in touch with Carol Swain, who I'd recognized from episodes of Hannity where she appeared in the bleachers there talking about racial issues, if you recall that. She had been the victim of all kinds of attacks at Vanderbilt University, where she was a law professor at the time. She had written, following the Charlie Hebdo killings in Paris, an op-ed piece for the Tennessean. She wrote, "What would it take to make us admit that we were wrong about Islam? What horrendous attack would finally convince us that Islam is not like other religions in the United States, that it poses an absolute danger to us and our children unless it is monitored better than it has been under the Obama administration?" But in the strident enclaves of social justice politics, she was pilloried and came very close to losing her job. She was accused of fostering an environment of hate. She was publicly shamed for offering some members, shamed for offending some members of the community. Not all, of course, only the ones that matter, right? She had her office invaded, her computer was vandalized, and somebody found a way to paint a swastika in her car. She was subjected to threats, fear, and intimidation simply for expressing her views on Islam. When she invited me to speak to her law class at Vanderbilt, I jumped at the chance. I wanted to talk to these snowflakes. And I did not cut any corners. And one of the things I said was, the first person who wants to confront me during the Q&A by saying it's just wrong to offend Muslims or gays or any other popular identity, please tell me where you find that in our Constitution. Is it in the First Amendment? Does it say that Congress shall pass no law interfering with your right not to be offended? And I said, I'm hopeful there are no children in this class that need a safe space to find protection from the thoughts you hate, because you'll never be able to have a life. You're too fragile. 3 of her students dropped the class after that. And Carol called me, and she was giddy about it. Now, she really doesn't require an introduction. She was on Fox and Friends this morning. She was on Huckabee yesterday. She's ubiquitous. She was in Dinesh D'Souza's film, Hillary's America. I'm sure you all saw her in that movie. And of course, you've seen her PragerU videos. She's everywhere. You can't escape her. She's on the radio. She's got books. And she's one of the loveliest women I've ever met, Dr. Carol Swain.
Well, Bill is a great person to have in your corner. And so I do call him from time to time when situations arise involving other people. And as far as being here today, I'm happy to be here, but my heart is heavy about the shooting in Texas. And I don't know if you all know that this is the anniversary of the Fort Hood shooting. And I don't know if there's any type of symbolism between the two, but we don't know much about the shooter, but we do know that it was someone who hated Christians enough to go into a church that had a membership of 50 and kill over half the population and wound, 15 or 20 of the other part of that congregation of 50. And so that's what's taken place. If you look at Twitter, the discussion pretty much is, there go those Christians again talking about prayer. The prayers, they don't make any difference. They need to be discussing gun control. And so it's all about gun control. And so it's very distressing. We are here, and this is really about hate. And what has taken place is a hate crime against Christians. And my presentation today was to be primarily focused on the Southern Poverty Law Center's targeting of Christians. I'm going to discuss 7 reasons why the Southern Poverty Law Center is not a credible organization. And I'm going to move very quickly through the list of reasons and then offer some suggestions on things I believe that we can do to make a difference. And the most important reason I think that we need to hold the Southern Poverty Law Center accountable is that they have enormous influence, not just with the media, but also with the U.S. Congress. They are advising Congress about the laws that govern us, and they're not a credible organization. They have no scientific objective criteria for how they designate which organizations are hate groups or which individuals they label as extremists. George Yancey, a sociologist at the University of Texas, did a study that was titled, "Watching the Watchers, the Neglect of Academic Analysis of Progressive Groups." He pointed out that the Southern Poverty Law Center has a dubious methodology that seems more geared at mobilizing leftist groups than it is in stopping hate. And I can tell you that the criteria that they use to label groups, their criteria would not be acceptable for an undergraduate research paper. So the first reason, the Southern Poverty Law Center does not meet basic standards for scientific research in its selection and classification of hate groups and extremists. The second reason why they're not credible. The Southern Poverty Law Center uses guilt by association to engage in attacks against individuals and organizations. And one of the most troubling incidents happened a few weeks ago. There was a young woman, her name is Hannah, I think it's Sherlacker. She works for Campus Reform. I've met her. You know, she's probably in her early 20s. She gave an interview to the Family Research Council. The interview was about socialism. She was listed in Hate Watch. Her name is listed in Hate Watch. When she contacted them, they said she was listed because she gave an interview to an organization that hates LGBT people. There was nothing that she said in her interview that had anything to do with LGBT. When the Southern Poverty Law Center puts you on their list of extremists, or if they list your name in Hate Watch, there are consequences. And I'm going to use my time to go over the list of reasons why they're not credible, but I can tell you briefly that they went after me once after I criticized them, and they called me an apologist for white supremacy. And that was because I gave a positive review of a film they said was racist. So much, you know, for their analysis. It's guilt by association, and we know that that is not a legitimate debating, you know, technique. They also ignore threats posed by leftist anti-American groups like Antifa, Black Lives Matter, ISIS, and the Muslim Brotherhood. And there's plenty of evidence. There's, in fact, a treasure trove of documentation about the Muslim Brotherhood and their intentions towards North America. They are aware of this, but they have not labeled the Muslim Brotherhood a hate group. And in fact, they have gone after individuals who have criticized Islam legitimately, legitimate analysis about the dangers of Islam, and they have labeled the groups, the organizations, the individuals as either extremists or as hate groups. And that's not, you know, legitimately based on what the groups do. It's a way to neutralize them and to discredit them. And back in 2009, when I wrote a blog about the Southern Poverty Law Center that was entitled Mission Creep, about how the Southern Poverty Law Center had lost sight of their purpose and they were now going off into other areas. At that time, they were going after immigration restrictionists. And what I noticed at that time was that any organization that was being effective in getting out information about the negative impact of immigration on American citizens, they would very quickly be labeled as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So they ignore the threats posed by leftist groups. Meanwhile, they are on a campaign against conservative groups or churches. And one of the things that, you know, I can give you another example. There was a church shooting in Antioch, Tennessee in August. And this Sudanese man went into the church. He killed one person. He wounded 7. Mostly it didn't get covered by news except for Fox. The Southern Poverty Law Center ran an article about this shooting that took place in August. I believe it was August, it could have been September. But it was like weeks later that they did an article, but not until after the FBI had started investigating it. And you'll be really surprised that they linked to an article that the Southern Poverty Law Center had done about black nationalism. And there was a line in that article that said that violent black nationalism has reached levels not seen in almost 40 years. When Richard Cohen is testifying before Congress, when the representatives of the Southern Poverty Law Center are on TV, you would think that the only threats in America was all white nationalism. Yet this article says violent black nationalism has reached a level not seen in nearly 40 years. They need to be held accountable for what they say and what they don't say. The Southern Poverty Law Center bashes conservatives while pushing a liberal agenda that empowers and supports leftists, communists, and anarchists. You know all about that. The organization smears mainstream public service organizations, churches, professional organizations, pro-family organizations, law firms, and research organizations. Organizations in its crosshairs include the American Family Association, Alliance Defending Freedom, Act for America, the Center for Immigration Studies, the Center for Security Policy, the Family Research Council, Liberty Council, and the Traditional Values Coalition, the D. James Kennedy Ministries, and I could go on. But these mainstream organizations are listed along with the neo-Nazis and the Klansmen as if they were equivalent. The Southern Poverty Law Center, this is number 6, is an irresponsible public charity. As of 2016, it had $319 million in net assets, with $69 million parked in offshore accounts. It's a fundraising machine with a high reserve ratio that's garnered it negative reviews from organizations such as SeriousGivers.org and Charity Watch. In fact, Charity Watch has given the SPLC an F rating in many years. And lastly, and probably most importantly for today, the Southern Poverty Law Center's labeling of groups and individuals has inspired acts of violence against the targets. The Southern Poverty Law Center listed the Family Research Council on its hate map when Floyd Lee Corkins, an LGBT activist, stormed the building in 2012 with the intent to commit a mass murder. He was stopped by a security guard who was wounded. He said that he got his target from the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate map. And James T. Hodgkinson, the man who shot Steve Scalise, Representative Scalise, and he inquired before he opened fire on the Republicans. He asked whether it was Democrats or Republicans practicing. He was a social media fan of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And so they have actually inspired acts of terrorism. And one of the things that they've done most recently to show you just how evil they are, and if there is a Southern Poverty Law Center representative in this room, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. And I hope that when you go back and you report to them, that you will have the integrity to hold them accountable. Hold them accountable because they are evil. They are committing, they're inspiring other people to commit acts of violence. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if this church shooter who hated Christians enough to go out and kill 27 people and wound 15 others, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if he was not somehow inspired by the kinds of things put out by organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Southern Poverty Law Center, right after the violence in Charlottesville, they published a map of 1,500 locations where there were Confederate monuments. And the purpose, they said, of publishing the location, the state, the location, the city of these monuments, they said that they needed to come down, otherwise there would be violence. I mean, it was just like how to find all the Southern monuments so you can create violence. And so these are the kinds of things this organization engages in. It's a totally irresponsible organization. They should never be testifying before Congress. Now, I move to the part of what can you do? One of the things that I think that we all should do, even if you have a liberal member of Congress and you have 2 liberal senators, write your members of Congress and ask them to refrain from allowing the Southern Poverty Law Center and its representatives to testify before Congress. And there's plenty of information out there for you to make the case as to why they should not be allowed to testify. And you can also go to a website that was created by a coalition of people from different organizations that have been targeted by the Southern Poverty Law Center. It's called SPLCexposed.com. All one word, SPLC Exposed. Go to that website. It's a treasure trove of articles. Share those articles on your social media and keep every time you think of it, every day, every other day, share an article about the Southern Poverty Law Center and the danger that they pose to other Americans. Then when it comes to corporations and donors that you can identify who support the Southern Poverty Law Center, it's important to let them know that you're watching them and that their businesses are susceptible to boycotts, just like with Targets. And so we need to hold the corporations accountable who support the Southern Poverty Law Center. So write members of Congress, urging them to refrain from asking or allowing the Southern Poverty Law Center to testify. Go to the website, Southern Poverty Law Center Exposed, and then also go to the corporate donors and let them know that you're watching them and that the Southern Poverty Law Center is not an organization that they should be supporting. And so I believe if we all start working with this common goal of exposing this organization, holding it accountable for what it has done and the violence that it is inspiring in this country, then I think that we might be able to prevail and America would be a better place. Thank you.